evening, everyone. We thank you for joining us today to our Advocacy and the AEC Industry Panel. My name is Kathleen Jacinto. I'm a structural engineer with Force Consulting, and I am also part of the SEAY WISE Committee, which is Women in Structural Engineering, as well as their EDI Committee, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. So I'll be one of the moderators for today's panel discussion, and I'd like to introduce Liz as well, who will be moderating as well.
Hi, guys. I'm an architect here at Getch Partners, and I'm also president of Women in Architecture. Everybody in our office. So let me take a moment to introduce all of our panelists. Here and move across. So first, Melissa Benoit. She's more than 17 years of professional experience. Melissa has worked on a range of office, hotel, mixed use, institutional, and government projects. She offers considerable experience with international assignments, having worked on projects and competitions in the Middle East and China. Projects include 155 North Wacker, 48-story Class A office tower in downtown Chicago, Abu Dhabi Global Market Square, 5 buildings, 290,000 per year, 4 office towers, and an international finance center, and the China Resources Wenzhou Tower, a 318-meter mixed-use tower in southern China. Melissa is an associate principal and serves as a project architect, leading the architectural team focus on technical clarity, internal communication, and assuring consistency in by participating in AIA's Leadership Summit, serving as a board member for Chicago Women in Architecture, current board member for Chicago Women in Architecture Foundation, and participating in multiple diversity panel discussions. Melissa continues to serve as a firm leader in advocating for women in the firm and profession. Next, we have Denise Moisafi. Denise is Senior Vice President, Marketing and Communications, and co-leads all national marketing and communications. More than 15 years of experience in the AEC industry, Denise oversees the development and implementation of marketing and communication strategies and creative initiatives. She brings a unique and well-rounded perspective in marketing and communication. Has managed the company's national brand standards and messaging. He also has a leadership role in community involvement and giving back partnerships with charitable organizations across the country. Local involvement in helping schools. He is also a member of CHIEF, a national professional network focused on connecting and supporting women executives. Has a Bachelor of Business Administration in Marketing and a Bachelor of Arts in Asian Studies and Literature from the University of Iowa. We have Paulina Beck. Paulina is an architect and facade engineer. She holds over 12 years of professional experience, background in architecture, and she currently practices as an associate facade engineer at Rural House, Chicago. She was previously part of the SOM and Gensler Chicago offices. With a deep passion for building enclosure, Paulina believes that merging design and engineering of facade systems will a sustainable future within the building. In free time, Paulina enjoys spending time in nature with her family and friends, as well as gardening, something she recently developed small passion for. Paulina holds a bachelor's in architecture degree from the Institute of Technology, as well as a master's in science in facade engineering from the University of Texas. Last but not least, we have Alyssa Fee. Alyssa is a licensed structural engineer in Illinois with IMEG Corp. She has been with IMEG for 16 years and has a total of 22 years of experience. Alyssa is currently an associate principal and senior engineer at IMEG and is operations manager for Chicago Neighborhood Structural Team. Has vast design experience and preparation of plans and specifications for various building types, utilizing masonry, precast concrete, reinforced concrete, and structural steel. Education and degree, Masters of Architecture from the University of Illinois, allows her to better understand concerns of science and education, their intent and needs. Experience in healthcare, higher education, commercial office buildings, K-12 schools, and assisted living. It's all for being here.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you all as well. And so, you might be what? So just to kind of kick off our discussion today, we are all members of the AEC industry, and we have a cross-section in our panel from each, we have an architect, two architects, an engineer, and contractor, or someone representing each of the three different industries. And I think that we can all agree that today's market is very different, and there's lots of turnover. There's they're calling it the Great Resignation, right? And so there are some retention concerns in our offices and in our workplaces. So we wanted to kind of put some numbers behind that to understand what we're looking at and how things have changed. In 2020, there was a survey done by the National Council of Structural Engineer Associations, NCSEA, and they have a committee called SE3, which is the Structural Engineering Engagement and Equity Committee. So that committee put out a survey to try to find out the reasons and factors that drive individuals to leave so this is specific to the structural engineering profession. And it also tried to understand what are some of the reasons why people are leaving, as well as what demographic groups are most at risk. So here is one set of results from that survey. So the question is, have you considered leaving the profession? On the right, of all the respondents, I think there were on the order of, I want to say 2,500 respondents. 55% of them responded yes, that they had considered leaving the profession. I just want to highlight that that's not a question of whether or not you want to leave the job that you're at or the office that you're working in, but it's, do you want to leave the profession where you went to school, or you maybe took exams, many exams for, you've worked, you've gained experience. So more than half of the respondents said yes, they have considered leaving the profession. And of those that said yes, 65% of them were women, 51% of them were men. And then you can kind of see the breakdown in demographics across in the middle section there. We thought that was really interesting, and we wanted to highlight that this is a real thing happening today. This was back in 2020, so of course it doesn't even take into account all that happened in the last 2 years. And some of the reasons why people were considering leaving the profession. Number one, so again, this is for SEs that were surveyed. It might be different across different industries. Achieving less stress was number one on the list. Achieving a better work-life balance was number two, better compensation. So all of these are really interesting, and I think it could play out into the discussion we'll have today. Basically, there might be the reasons why people are resigning: low pay, no opportunity for advancement, burnout. Potentially now childcare is more of a real thing since those occurrences of the last 2 years. And of those, it was 65% more women were feeling potentially overlooked or under-recognized. And so we know that this is what we're facing in today's market, and we thought, well, what are some positive discussions that we can have about this? Like, how can we further this discussion, but in a positive way. And we had last year a panel discussion called Survival Strategies Through COVID. And one of the panelists had shared a story, and she said that I was doing the same thing for several years. She was a contractor, and she said I was doing the same thing for several years, and I was working. And then suddenly, how she felt about work completely changed for one reason. It was that she had an advocate in her work environment. And we wanted to hear more about that. We wanted to see, we all leaned in during the panel discussion, and we were like, tell us more. How can something so change so much black and white like that for one reason? And we thought, we would love to explore that more and take a whole panel discussion to try to talk about that and talk to more people and see if there are some positive stories that we can hear on how maybe others have been advocated for, or they've advocated for others, or they've advocated for themselves. So we hope that you can take away something from today's talk as we hear the great stories from our panelists. And I also wanted to mention that what we're thinking of in terms of advocacy is different from mentorship, that we know that there can be a mentor that you're assigned to in your offices. But what we're thinking is someone that's a little bit, takes on a more active role in your career and as an advocate, someone who is maybe in a room that you can't be in and have conversations with decision makers in your firm and who champions for you, who advocates for you a little bit more than a mentor. Mentor almost coaches you more on the side, but what we were kind of interested in more was how an advocate can change a person's career path. And maybe not so powerful as that, or maybe a lesser down version, but that was generally the idea behind our inspiration for this panel discussion. So, we'll go ahead and start asking our questions.
I'll just add that a lot of the things that Kathleen talked about are true across studies that show women's depression at a higher rate than men, and a lot of the reasons given are very similar to those given, like balance, lack of mentorship, things like that. So I think it is pretty applicable across the AEC industry. Sure.
So our first question is, could you please kind of introduce yourselves a little bit and describe your career path? It would also be helpful, I just wanted to add in, if you can mention the size of the firms that you have worked at as well, as it might play into that advocacy relationship. Are you welcome to kick off?
I'll start. So I went to the University of Cincinnati for my master's and my undergraduate, and something that was really unique for that university is they require you to co-op, so you have to have a job. You school for a semester, go to job for a semester, go back and forth. So I've had many jobs, which has been great for me. So I've had things ranging from single-family homes in the Northwest to cemetery and crypt design here in Chicago, to being here at Getch Partners. So, and it's funny because I never wanted to do corporate architecture. It was one of those things that I'm like, oh my God, no, that is not who I am. And then I discovered it's actually pretty fun. It's like solving big puzzles and it makes me happy, you know? So my path has been navigating what makes me happy. So I remember when I graduated, I would switch jobs every 10 months, 12 months. Not because I wasn't happy, because I was like, it was like a shiny ball was over there and I needed to go see what it was. But it's just, for me, I was lucky at the time, and I think probably now is the same. You can get just about any job you want if you just walk out the door and sneeze. So I was really compelled to just find something that made me happy. And then later in life, had to figure out how to stay happy, right? Like everything shiny and new makes everyone happy. So I landed here originally 2004, but I quit twice. So yeah, I'm in the three timers club now. We get past it now. We come back. But it was because something happened to where I wasn't happy, I wasn't fulfilled, and I needed to find it somewhere else. I will say at the time, the 2 times that I left, I didn't even try to advocate for myself. I just got mad, fell on my feet, and left. And now I'm learning a little better, like, oh, I need to, like, this place makes me happy. I keep coming back. I got to figure out. Okay, so we can talk more about that later, but that's on my path, kind of figuring out where I'm going. My path is not a straight line by any means. It is topsy-turvy, it's terrible, but that's how I've been working with.
I started in the industry about 16 years ago, straight out of school. I took whatever job somebody would give me. So I landed at Thornton Tomasetti, and started doing marketing for Thornton Tomasetti. And then after a few years there, I switched over to the architecture side, did a stint at Parkinson Will, and then now I'm at Clean Construction, which is about 600 people with 6 offices and 2 satellites across the country. So big national general contractor. And I would say, like, one of the things that kind of made me switch is I always thought I was looking for a new challenge, but marketing is pretty much the same in every company within AEC. It's proposal writing, it's, project interviews, it's pretty pictures. So it really wasn't about the challenge when I got to Clune. It was that I found an advocate that would push me ahead in my career. And it was, it completely changed my outlook in marketing and AEC.
Oh, yeah. I'm also all ears. So like Liz mentioned, I graduated from IIT, so I was back in 2009, right after the recession. I was very lucky to keep my internship job for a very small architecture office. I was really grateful for it. It was very hands-on experience doing car dealerships. And then I got an opportunity to join SOM a year after graduation, and I was obviously very thrilled. So I spent 8 years working for SOM since 2010, and I really enjoyed working there. I loved the technical rigor. It was a big company, and I felt like I was given a lot of resources, and those resources to me still are the people that I work with. So I had really great mentors, but I found myself in some personal situations that kind of called for readjustment, kind of reassessing where I want to be in my career. But one thing that I gained from SOM is that I really got to work a lot on secure wall systems, and I developed a huge passion for them. And I was able to foster that passion and take it further because people were advocating for me as well. That's kind of what I brought from SOM, and I also tried joining Gensler, met some wonderful people there. What Gensler gave me, SOM couldn't, but also I missed that technical rigor. And eventually I found my place at Bureau Happel. Bureau Happel is at the moment growing their Chicago team. They're a big global company, so I still feel like I'm part of a very large company like SOM and Gensler. But it's almost like we have a startup here because we're 25 people, and I think that's a really precious thing to me. And I had to navigate a lot of these sort of personal moments that affected my career, and I wouldn't find a place where I'm very happy professionally if it wasn't for reaching out to advocates, if it wasn't for people recognizing that they can advocate for me, and I'm really grateful for that experience, and I'd love to share more about that. Also, I encourage you to ask questions, because
So as Liz mentioned, I'm with IMEG currently, but I actually started my career in high school with a co-op program as a drafter for 3 hours a day after school. So I did internships pretty much all through college, with a couple different firms. And so since college, since I graduated with my master's in architecture, I've only been with a couple firms. I did have other experience with firms, previous to that were all on the smaller side. It's where I learned architecture may have not been what I wanted to do, but actually the structural engineering side of architecture. And so, you know, I started out with a smaller size firm, and I really enjoyed, you know, working for a smaller firm, but you know, looking back, I think one of the reasons that I did leave was maybe I didn't feel like I was being advocated for. And so when I came to IMEG, at the time we were KJWW, we were a lot smaller firm, and we were 5 offices, about 300 people at the most. But structural, it's a multidiscipline firm. We have structural and MEP, and technology as well. And structural was only a small component of it. We only had a couple people in our Naperville office. And what was nice about that was, you know, it felt like a small team to start with. And getting to know so many other people from another discipline. And that's where I kind of found that the people from the other discipline were willing to advocate for me to help grow my career. That's not necessarily within my group at the time, because just a couple people, but other people wanting to include me to help grow the structural team in the Naperville, Chicago office. And it's one of the reasons that, you know, I stayed as long as I have, 16 years, and haven't really looked to well, that's probably a couple times I wanted to be like, well, forget this place, but, no, just, but it's, one of the reasons that, you know, I have stayed as long as I have is because I found that, inclusion and them wanting to advocate and help to build my career to where we're at. Now IMEG is you know, I think we have 1,400 people right now and continuing to grow. So it's nice to get in at the beginning as we grow, and that's kind of my career. Touched on different ways, or kind of mentioned how advocacy has changed your path, or encouraged you to stay at a job or to move on. But advocacy can take a lot of different forms. Not always the big move, right? Where you need an advocate. It can be. What are some ways in which you advocated for, or have advocated for others? I can start. So it started a little bit with advocating for myself, but one of the important things for my career, I felt, was, you know, getting my name out there to different architects and meeting them and different clients. And so what I noticed was, you know, my resume at the time wasn't being used as much. And so I went to my supervisor and said, why isn't my resume being used? And when they would send out for RFPs, and I don't think it occurred to him at the time. He's like, oh, we just have always used so-and-so's because, it's, you know, again, we were a small team at the time. And so as soon as I brought it to his attention, he's like, well, there's no reason we can't use your resume, send it out, get your name out there. And they started to use it pretty much on, you know, for the RFPs that were coming out. And so to me, you know, it started with me kind of having to say something and pointing it out to my supervisor that was what was happening. And it was unintentional on his part. He didn't mean anything by it, because he knew I could perform the work and would work with the various clients on the project. It was, you know, he just hadn't occurred to him that could further my career. But as soon as it did, you know, he was gung-ho, and every RFP that came in, he was like, yep, we're going to use your resume this time again. And that has really helped me grow personally.
I'm going to go rogue because I planned to answer this question differently, but after what you've mentioned, because I think it's advocacy to me is outside of these very formal meetings that we often think are the perfect place and time for, you know, being advocated for or advocating for others. I think it's doing a lot of talking about yourself, and we have to kind of get used to that. And it took me, you know, I've been practicing as an architect/engineer for quite some time, and it took me many years to kind of be very confident in being able to speak about my skill set, my talents, my experience, and then communicating it in a manner such as this one, like RFPs, like why is this always the same resume? I believe I can be the resume that's being put forth, and it's kind of like conditioning yourself to just speak up. And I think I will mention that I feel like inherently and historically and culturally, men are just conditioned to do that from since they're little. For us, I think it kind of comes a little bit later and slower, unfortunately. And like self-advocacy is something that we have to do every day. And I don't think we have to wait for a yearly review with your supervisor or manager. I think it can happen in the room, in a meeting, or when you're grabbing coffee. And I think it starts with finding someone that you think will actually listen. Because we can make assumptions that, oh, my resume is not being put forward for this project because they don't think I fit in. You just can bring the idea to the table, and then they may be very open to it. And this is, I think, like just being very bold with and outspoken about your needs. That I think will set up, will shift culturally how AEC industry has been to date kind of operating, so that women can really thrive and feel like they can just raise a hand and say, I'd love to be part of this project, or I'd love for you to give me more responsibility, or I'd love for you to tell me, what can I do so that I can keep advancing. So I really like that you brought that in, because sometimes it's just a simple question. And you can hear no,
Yeah.
but oftentimes you'd be surprised that a lot of people and leaders may be very open to your ideas. So that's kind of how I see advocacy is a lot of talking about yourself. Yeah.
Now that you've kind of do that for yourself on a more regular basis, on an everyday, how do you encourage you're an advocate for
And take up that question, but
yeah.
I think, and this is it's a personal observation of mine, but I always lacked role models in the workplace. Very pivoting point in my career was when I became a mom, and I truly struggled because I had very few coworkers and peers that I could feel like I can relate to them, that I can ask them questions about how do I stay here, how do I navigate project load, project work, leading projects, and being happy at home, and being present for my children. And I think that we can encourage self-advocacy by modeling a certain behavior and just being present and showing people that are above us, below us, at our level, that we are communicating our needs on a daily basis. And again, it doesn't have to happen behind closed doors. I think it's important that we take opportunity at a lot of informal meetings. We can always pull someone and say, hey, let's grab coffee. I'd like to talk to you. I have this idea, or I've been thinking about something. And I think just like your observation, we can foster this cultural shift. And I specifically have young women in architecture and engineering in mind, because I think they will feel more confident by seeing us and other women modeling this sort of confidence as well.
I think you bring up a really good point, though, because it's when you're talking about self-advocating, it's not always the big project or the big ask at review time. It could be anything throughout the year that you're asking for yourself just to give you a little bit more experience in something, right? So anytime that I'm talking to my team, and I always say, you know, like, advocate for yourself. If you want something, just ask, right? Like, there's no harm in asking. Worse, somebody can say no. Right?
Absolutely. Understanding communication is key, right? I think a lot of times we get in our own heads and we have a problem. It's very obvious, website and we think other people see it, but most of the time they don't see it. So if you're not communicating your needs, and you're not communicating how to solve them, or you're that it even exists, people don't know. And they're not being malicious, they just don't see it. You've got to communicate.
Yes, and that brings up a good point, because I feel the bigger the firm, the easier it is to be overlooked, and we have to do more to stand out. And so it sounds like we're talking a lot about how sometimes advocacy takes different forms, as Liz has said. Sometimes we have to work at it. Like you mentioned, we have to ask for our resume to be included in the RFP. We have to stand out, prove our value to others. And sometimes advocacy can start without you even asking for help. Sometimes somebody just sees the potential, if we're lucky, and will advocate for you. I used to say that my first company, that wherever you end up sitting on day one can really define how much of your career shapes out. Like whoever your manager is or your supervisor is can make a big difference. So I'd like to ask, which approach do you feel you fit closer to? And along those lines, are there certain environments that you feel support advocacy more? So I guess which approach would you fit closer to? Did advocacy start without you asking, or did you have to work to stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my journey with advocacy started out without me even knowing about it. The person that hired me at Clune, he was just one of the partners that had an interest in marketing and was just like, okay, well, I'll hire a marketing coordinator, that's fine. So I sat right outside of his office, and we had a very informal relationship where I'll just like yell things into his office, like, what do you think about this? He'd be like, sure, go for it. You know, because he was not the marketing expert. He hired me to do that job, so he trusted that I knew what I was doing. So that's kind of how it started, is we just informally back and forth tried new and different things that Clune has never tried before. And then we built this relationship of trust, and then that just started opening up a lot of doors for me, where he was a partner of the firm, so he went to all the managing director meetings, he talked to the C-suite, talked to the board, and he would just bring up my name in these meetings and say like, well, Denise had a really good idea, why don't we try this? Or, hey, social media, that's a thing now, so let's do that. And that's kind of how it started for me. It was just like completely unbeknownst to me, he just started, you know, throwing my name out there, and that's how I got to where I am at Clune. But I would say the best environment for advocacy is one that is very collaborative, because if people aren't seeing that the whole is bigger than the parts, and it's a very combative or very, it's a very combative environment. Like, no one's going to want to advocate for others, so, you know, like, you're not going to get an advocate for yourself, and you're not going to want to advocate for others. So anything that's a very competitive environment doesn't really work for advocacy.
I had a very similar right here. One of the partners just took me under his wing right away, and I was working at 155. It was my first job here. And I remember fresh out of college and, you know, going to these OAC meetings of all these people. I had no idea what was going on. Oh, sit at the table, we have this, and we just wanted to be like, no, we have a question, hang on. He had no qualms about, you need to learn this stuff, we're gonna teach you. And I went on to another project with him, and his, you know, we're coordinating these things, working on an international project. He's like, you know what, you really need to go to Paris and meet the structural engineers. So he had no problem putting me in the right spot to learn what I needed to learn and to keep moving forward. And then I was lucky enough to get a second mentor here at another studio that had the same approach. But what's interesting is all that was happening without me really knowing, and I was very grateful for the experiences that I wasn't thinking, oh gosh, these guys are advocating for me, right? It didn't cross my mind. But then I got to the mid-career level where these guys were more my mentors and no longer my advocates, and I was kind of stuck. And I had to learn how to do it myself. So that was interesting for me. It was like almost a very hard life lesson to learn because I had it taken for granted almost. That you guys were really pushing hard to get me started, but same experience that got me.
Yeah, I'm definitely grateful for some people in leadership advocating for me, and yeah, oftentimes I didn't even recognize it as advocacy. But I was always grateful for two reasons. One, because I felt like it could advance me for sure, but it really gave me much more confidence. When you hear that someone's advocating for you, you feel that extra power of an energy and self-belief. So you're putting self-doubt aside and you're saying, okay, someone said I'm really good at something and they want me to continue doing that. And there is something really golden in that. That's why I think advocacy matters, because it's not only about promotion or salary increase or, climbing to the top. I think it's actually like fostering your love for something. And because then through that love for something, you end up doing it much easier and with much more passion, and that kind of just pushes you further, right? Pushes you out. So that there's so many moments that I remember that you may hear that someone said something good about you in a meeting. So hearing that something happens behind closed doors and people are speaking well of you, that's amazing. But then also someone saying like, hey, I really want you to do this, and I'm going to put your name forward. But like Melissa mentioned, navigating like big offices, which I always did, because that's what I'm in Gensler, and your Huffles are also, your Huffles, as much as our office is small, it's a big company. I always had to navigate a sea of people, and it takes a lot of figuring out who is your advocate, who you should speak to. And I remember being frustrated at some point in my career, maybe like 6 years into working at SOM, where I thought, well, they're not hearing what I want to do, or they're not hearing that I'd love to do this part of this project, or take on that project. And then like the light bulb went off, and I realized that, well, my supervisor has 40 people under him, and he's extremely busy, and I need to grab his attention, and I need to pull him aside because he's not gonna spend more than a second thinking about me. So I just kind of took it into my own hands and set up a meeting with him and just laid it out to him, like, this is what I'm thinking, let me know what your thoughts are. And I think that's kind of like where I had to shift also from having others advocate for me, but like just kind of adjusting my own path on my own and taking it into my own hands. And sometimes it's not easy because again, I was very nervous about it. I wasn't sure if I'm doing the right thing. Am I going to come off as something? But people, when you figure out that people listen, that's all you need to know, is that someone's actually listening to what you're saying, and that goes a long way.
For me, gaining the trust of other people, specifically since I work with a lot of people that are not my discipline, and getting them to understand, what it is that I do. That was a lot of work, and it was, I had to put time and effort into gaining their trust, showing them that I can do what I'm saying that I can do, and and show the clients that I am capable of responding to the questions, that I'm responsive, and it was very important, and it's one way to stand out. But once I got their trust, they wanted to include me, wanted to bring me to the meetings, include me in correspondence, say, hey, she's the one that you can go to for answers, and really kind of standing up for me and letting me grow as an engineer. She's the one that knows the project the best. That was really key for furthering my career where it's at. A little bit about navigating a larger firm and how that can be advocate for yourself. I wonder if you have any other examples of what you can do to stand out when you are in a larger firm where maybe the person who oversees your work on a day-to-day basis isn't the person who actually directly advocates for you. They're not in a good position to advocate for you. How do you go about in that environment?
Oh, I think I already answered that.
Well, for me, you know, with IMEG being the size that it is, I really had to find, you know, a personal connection with some of the people. And I found one with a client executive in my office, and not, again, not my discipline. And really kind of, you know, developing a relationship to letting him know, get to know my personality as well. And, you know, it wasn't easy because, you know, I work with majority males. And it's sometimes they don't, you know, there's an unintentional bias sometimes. And if you don't have the same background as someone else, you don't necessarily gravitate to them. So with the firm size that we have, you know, I kind of just, you know, worked with a couple select individuals that then let them present my name. You know, this happens to be a senior client executive that, you know, was able to, in a form that he was filling out for the vice president, and saying, you know what, she's, for this team, she's the person that we're going to, and she's great at what she's doing, and she's really helpful for our team in evaluation. And so, you know, that then got the vice president's notice, and, you know, letting them know, like, hey, you know, we really think they're doing a great job. So you kind of have to find someone, work with them quite a bit. At least that's how I was able to navigate it. After a certain year, you're advocate for, how did you?
I reached out by my network, you know, so it's not that they don't, but, I just don't want to. It's not a bad thing. At some point, I'm like, I have to do this myself. But so I worked at Gensler for, with Paulina, and learned a lot there by learning how to navigate. That company's huge compared to my studio with 80 people at Gensler. So learning Gensler and how to, I just start communicating with people at different levels to understand the region, the firm, and I made a lot of good connections there. Those are actually my advocates now. And when I mean by that, they're not coming into this office and saying different things. What I'd like to do is go to these people and talk to them about, look, I need this, and I am definitely an emotional person. My emotions will get the best of me a lot. And you can't help but get emotional when you're talking about your career path and what you're needing, right? So I like to talk to these people, advocates on the side, and be real, right? I can be raw and be real with these people. And they can help me see it from a totally different business perspective because they're not invested in this business, which is very helpful for me. So I use these folks as my advocates now to help me shape my own message. So I'm not taking the emotion out and being a little more logical about it. I don't know if that's the right word, but just approaching it in a different way that I'm not coming at it emotionally. So I use my network to help me advocate for myself, actually.
Does bring up a good point that advocates aren't necessarily even working in the same office as you, but they can be what we were calling your personal board of directors, just like colleagues that you may have worked with in the past, that you run things by or you float different scenarios by. That's very valuable because they might see something that you're not seeing when you take the, like you said, day-to-day.
Yeah, you're so invested, you get tunnel vision in your own firm, right? So when someone else isn't involved in the politics of it every day going on, it's so much beneficial to talk to them together.
Even just talking it through, you start to see something that when they say to you, start from the beginning, and then you start thinking through the whole process, you're like, oh, I didn't, like, yes, they're really good. So in the spirit of trying to inspire everyone to ways that we can potentially advocate for others, since we're hearing such great value and why being advocated for is beneficial, what are some different ways that you think a person can advocate for another in a firm? And if you have advocated for others, how did that actually start? We want to know how to start this relationship with potentially another person. If you have advocated for others, did somebody reach out to you, or did you see a pathway for someone and you wanted to help them, or describe that a little? Paulina,
I think I can pull like actually real life examples, and I'll go back to the fact that I think women inherently we should speak out more, and I recognize that sometimes you have to kind of read in between the lines, and you can recognize that, let's say, your peer or someone on your team, as much as their job is to deliver the project, they may mention, oh, I'm interested in sustainability, or I'm interested in trying out a different expertise, or I'd love to do this project type. And sometimes that gets missed because we're all busy just meeting deadlines. So again, I think it starts with being a really good listener. And when we recognize that someone mentions something, and they may not be very intentional about, seeking advocacy, but they may mention that they are interested in something, we should kind of like just memorize it and then take opportunity to mention that person's name or recommend something to them. And I think we cannot also push someone too far or start advocating for them if they may not want to be advocated for. But if you are recognizing that someone's struggling figuring out their career path, then you should absolutely step in. And one thing I'd like to also recognize is, again, it's not only, leadership advocating for you. You can advocate for your peers. You can advocate for people that are also above you. Sometimes your leader or supervisor may need advocating for. Or it's someone that is just like your peer, your team member. You can mention that you're loving working with them. I would love for people to say that more often because we miss that. And I've had the pleasure of working with some really great people, and I want to, because outside of being good architects and engineers, it takes a team, and we have to kind of be in sync. So to be a really good team member and team player, I think deserves recognition. So those are some ways I think we can advocate for others, but I think it starts with being a good listener.
I was kind of thinking about my own journey, and after being advocated for and kind of pulled into a position that you're able to advocate for others is really powerful, because then you're starting to notice the other opportunities for other people. So a couple of years ago, I started just like name dropping other people on my team or peers that I've been working with in other offices, just recognizing that they're working on a new cool type of technology, or, something that isn't broad across the entire company yet. Like, okay, well, this guy is doing something new, you guys should really check it out. Leadership, hey, take a look at this guy, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's a lot of times you do like a technical review or review with someone higher up. And I think it's important to acknowledge what people do, right? Like, when I walk in with a set, I didn't do that set. I didn't do the whole thing. And that's impossible, right? So to go through it, and if they're looking at it, like, who did all this, lived through all these plans, did you know that, in like a day. So you need to let people know what other people are doing, because, when you have a supervisor that's 40 people under them, they have nothing. So to give credit where credit is due is very important.
Even if you're getting an email that says thank you, be like, cool, Melissa did all that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then making sure you copy them on that email. So
Right.
they can even see, you're one crediting them, but they're also seeing that recognition. Sometimes, I think leadership sometimes doesn't, they'll get the email, and they may not necessarily tell you like, hey, so-and-so says that this was a good job or something like that. And we've all been in that position of not being told that, and we want to hear that. And so making sure you're telling your fellow coworkers, hey, you know what, so-and-so said this was great, and let them know you did it is key. And so including them on that email. And, Paulina said, just overall listening to what they want to do. You know, when staff tells me like, oh yeah, I'm interested in this type of project, that's forefront of my mind as soon as we get that project. It's like, hey, what can we do to get them on this? If we can't do it now, I'll acknowledge that with the person and say, hey, I wanted to get you on this. It doesn't fit your schedule, but the next one, I will get you assigned to this one. It's not something that I've forgotten, so acknowledging it to them and letting them know that you are thinking about them and you want to help with them with what they want to do.
But I wanted to ask one more question before we open it up to everybody else. For all of your firms, are there specific things that you're doing at the office that are remote advocacy relationships, environment?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we're doing internally. We started a mentoring program that formalizes some of these relationships and inter-office and inter-department relationships. So people can just get to know each other on a different level and then start talking and coaching, as Kathleen, you mentioned, on how to further their career and professional development. And then we also have like an employee engagement program where people can nominate others for like spotlight awards. And so there's a more informal way to kind of give a kudos to a coworker, and then the entire company gets a notification that, you know, this person won the spotlight awards this month and they get a little prize. And it's just a fun way for everybody to kind of give each other a high five.
So one of the things that my firm has started doing is having had a part of my career where I wasn't being advocated for and knowing how I felt about that, and knowing a lot of it had to do perhaps with, you know, an unintentional bias is what it is, because the person can't relate to you on that personal level, is we have started actually unintentional bias training, just to kind of help everyone see, like, sometimes when you're, you know, like tends to stay with like, and you need to broaden your horizons, and not to say anything negative, but we are a little bit in a male-dominated profession sometimes, and, you know, what sometimes happens is, you know, when we would get together, you know, the men would be on one side, the women on the other, and so, you know, in order to not have that unintentional bias and, you know, get to know your other colleagues and recognize that that's sometimes factoring into little things, you know, it's even just small day-to-day that you may not even realize that you're doing. We did this, we started this training, and what was interesting was the majority of people said, you know, I hadn't really given this much thought before it, of what, you know, and it's, again, it's small things, it's not intentional, and it's not meant to, you know, oh, we don't want you to continue in your career, it's just they hadn't thought about it. And so I think that's one nice thing that my firm has done recently, to kind of open your eyes to all of the employees and all of the various, you know, relationships that can happen.
That's kind of unintentional advocacy consequences, let's say. So we do have a mentor group, but we also we have all these little groups that we organize. A lot of them are about either sharing some technical information with other technical people, or an entire project being presented to the firm. And those are great because it's never the leadership on the team that's allowed to present. Because the intent is that the younger staff gets a chance to present at all, and this is the free environment to make a mistake, right? You're just in front of colleagues, you're not in front of clients making mistakes. But it also gives the team a moment to show off what they did, and finally speak up for themselves, right? So that's kind of an unintended or unintentional advocacy for themselves. But We also have like the social groups, which I think are important because the entire firm participates. And again, we're not that big, really. We are 80 people, but for the type of work we do, it's small. So when we have these social events, and Jim Gutson's in the room talking to the interns, that's important, breaking down the barriers. So you find something that you can talk to this person about, and now you're relating in some way. I had a crazy conversation with Jim when I started about hunting. Because his family's from North Dakota and my family's from West Virginia, and that's just what you do. So we had this weird thing that we could connect on, but how would I have ever known that? We can go to the social thing, So these are kind of things that we do to at least break down the barrier and give you the opportunity to talk about yourself.
Probably a great point. Thank you. Definitely food for thought as we try to see how we can align some of our own company policies with some of these good ideas. And I know that we're up against time now, so I just to conclude, I wanted to throw out a few gems I heard from these ladies, and you're welcome to also interject and add in anything else you wanted to, any last thoughts you had. But what I heard a lot of is that communication is key, and so taking advantage of opportunities like the social events, that she said, trying to get in front of different people in your firm, especially if it's a big firm, and learning how to navigate that, the layers, many layers, talking to people, seeing who can help you, and also learning their personalities, who is more maybe altruistic in this company, who might be more open to lending a helping hand is key. And then once that relationship has started, continuing to communicate all that we do in our daily work and is key, and tooting our own horns, right? And that advocacy is not only the people that we work with, that a lot of it is self-advocacy, is just as important as being advocated for by someone else. And also looking to our personal board of directors is also a form of advocacy as well. But the advocating for ourselves, somebody had mentioned that there comes a point in our careers where we just need to start to advocate for ourselves, because it can be more powerful when we say it. And what we say is more what we want out of our career rather than somebody else saying something on our behalf, but we don't know if that's actually what we want. And then at the end of the day, if you might remember some of those graphs that we showed at the start, where some of the reasons why people leave the profession is stress and burnout, growth in the company. And I can definitely see how having an advocate can really turn those types of things around, where you know somebody sees the value you bring, and those long hours do count, and having an advocate does matter. When it's much more rewarding when you work so much to know that somebody sees it and appreciates it and is pushing for an advancement in your career. And it's a positive way to retain talent. So we do hope that today's talk does inspire everyone to advocate for someone else in your office, or think of ways to find or initiate that advocacy relationship.
If anybody in the room has questions, feel free to shout it out. We're not too large of a group, so.
So did you seek out potential variety of people, oh, this might be a good advocate for me, and just kind of start building that relationship and then see where it went, or how did you actually find an advocate? If that makes any sense.
For me, it was my project manager to start with. Those were the ones that were advocating for me without me knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I'm talking about my network, my advocate is it's someone I just find her to be an amazingly strong, powerful woman, and a leader I want anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I gravitate towards her. So then she has the qualities that I think are great for a leader and that I would like to have. So I definitely was seeking her out.
Yep. I think it's it's building this relationship with an advocate can take time, and it may turn out that it may not work out. Like, I think it's a very long process sometimes. It's not like one meeting or one conversation. It's sometimes figuring out if that person has the capacity and a platform that they can kind of leverage to put you in the right place or the place that you'd like to be in. And so, like, sometimes you have to be, like, open to it not working out. So it's definitely not sticking to one person, I would say. I think it's really going also outside of your project, team. So again, I think it's just a long process. Sometimes may not work out. It's like a relationship that, not, I can't believe I'm bringing that, but yeah.
I would agree. I probably sought out a couple different people over a period of time just to kind of see what would stick and who I could work more with and who would be that advocate until if something stuck, and then realizing that, okay, yes, this is working for both of us.
I have a question too. First, a comment. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I think one of the things that resonates most with me is that the topic of advocacy leads to feeling valued, and I think then feeling valued leads to staying where you are and wanting to, be in that environment rather than seek someplace else out. I'm curious if you have any advice for, somebody who may work for an engineering firm that may not be headquartered in this city, and maybe you have great relationships with the people in your office, but I'm learning that at a certain point, some decisions are made in the corporate office area, and those are people that I don't necessarily interact with all the time. So how do you try to get, what you're doing out to those people?
I can share that, since I switched from architecture to engineering, I can share that also. I started working for an engineering firm that also is not headquartered here during the pandemic. So I started fully remotely, and I was very anxious about not being connected. But in a way, I think the pandemic worked out, like the setup of working from home worked out well for me, because it was so much easier to get connected with people in other offices, because it didn't matter if you were in Chicago or New York or LA, it was still a Teams call away. So I think taking advantage of that is I think worked out well, and this way I was able to be connected, and I felt like there's no barrier in that sense. Like, I don't have to start here to start networking or getting to know people or understanding what the company is all about. But I think in general, it's just not easy, because when you're in a big company, it's just so many layers, and it's like you're breaking the hierarchy of titles. And I think I can share that at BH, it is encouraged that everybody talks to everyone despite their level. So I think just being bold and reaching out and saying, hey, I've heard that you have experience in this. Can I share some thoughts with you? But it's not easy because of the size, and everyone's busy, so busy. Yeah.
I would say the biggest piece of advice is to build relationships outside of the office. Clune is headquartered in Chicago, so I'm very lucky with that, but I have been making sure I pull in people from the other offices. I was able to, a couple of years ago, just, I reached out to someone else's boss. I'm like, hey, I know it's not my place, but this person has been doing an amazing job over the last 2 years. Can you put him in for something at the next, review session? I think you really need to take a look at this person. So it's just building that relationship, even if it's informally, and starting so small.
So we have an office in Shanghai. Clearly, we are not seeing anyone in Shanghai right now. So I think what's important is trying to, like you said, reach out, and even if it's a peer, reach out to in another office. The thing you want to do is come to all the time. People review. People need to know your name. You need to know what you're doing. So even if it's your peers, or, you know, if the whole marketing group, whether you're here or New York, you know who you are. You know, if you do structural engineering for high-rises, all of the structural engineers for high-rises need to know who you are. So it's a phone call, it's a, you know, it's a Zoom, it's a, hey, I saw you work on this project, can you tell me about it? People love talking about stuff, you know.
Yeah.
You have to, don't be afraid to reach out, you work at the same company. It definitely is awkward to start, but then as soon as you start talking.
Like, put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Like, I love when people reach out to me and say, hey, I heard that, you know, you did this. Can you tell me more about the project? Like, yeah, we so often would like to speak more about the work that we do, but we're too busy just delivering it. So, like, just to reverse it, like, I never had anyone say, like, oh, I don't have time for you, or, like, sorry, like, you know, no one dismissed my request for reaching out. So, yeah, I think it's, like, be painful. Doesn't matter what the title is at all, yeah.
Technology nowadays allows it a little bit easier to, I think, reach out in a way. You know, in my company, we have, you know, the structural discipline has its own little chat group, in fact. So, you know, I'm talking to my execs in other offices and reaching out like, hey, I heard you worked on this project. To kind of get, you know, to know them as well. So it is kind of just reaching out and asking them about what type of project. But I will say it is very, very hard. I think one way that I got noticed was I took a 3-month internship, not internship, but more of a co-locate in a different office with another vice president, and that was like the one thing that to me really opened up a lot of doors. And so you maybe have to look for that one opportunity that's outside your comfort zone, to kind of then stand out to a specific person. So like that vice president noticed me, and then suddenly vice president of structural engineering noticed, and like I'd always known the CEO because when we were a smaller company, it's the same CEO and president. But it is difficult, yes. Particularly if you don't have a hierarchy that allows for them to come to your offices frequently to get to know the staff.
We have a question from one of our online participants, Diana. She's asking, do you directly ask for someone to be an advocate in a similar way that you would ask someone to be a mentor, or is there a difference in how you kind of set up those relationships?
I guess depending on what it is. There's something you see, associate, a principal, a partner that helps you, right? You need to mentor you here. What you're looking for. So I think it depends on your situation, how you approach it. But you have to kind of think of your end goal and how it is. You know, why do you want this advocate? To be out in the room? Okay, well then you need to see. So it definitely, I think, is different depending on.
It can be both organic and very sort of direct, saying, I need someone to speak up for me because I can't be part of that meeting or decision making, and can you relay this to the rest of the room? And I think for me, most of the time it's more organic. I believe it's like start small, but you can absolutely ask someone directly, I think, and see how it goes, because you never know. So that, I don't think anyone should be discouraged from like just directly saying like, hey, can you be my advocate? Why not?
I think it helps to start with a specific need.
Yeah.
If there is something that you need brought up in a meeting because you're not physically there, that can be a pathway to a more, a bigger advocacy relationship.
Talked a lot about how like self-advocacy is important. Have you guys ever come across a situation where you self-advocated for yourself and it wasn't well received? And if you came across a situation like that, how did you navigate it?
I self-advocated myself for the current position that I And at first it was, I don't, do you really want that position? And I said, yes. And I said, what do I need to do for that? And, okay, well, you're gonna have to do this, and, so then I worked to achieve that. So at first it was kind of like, okay, you're telling me I can't be this. It was a punch in the gut, as to what, I really wanted to do in my career. And then it was, okay, now what do I need to do to fix it? So it was helpful because I turned it around. Okay, you're not going to advocate for me for this, and what do I need to do for you to do that? So I kind of turned it around to get an idea for them.
I feel like if I had instances like this too, I was self-advocating, it wasn't working out, but it never turned out into a completely negative experience. Like, it was still something that allowed me to, like, adjust, rethink, and create a new strategy. So, like, that was already helpful, and to me, like, they're not failures at all, because I had to do so much self-advocacy against 6 years ago when I became a mom, and I still felt like I wasn't being understood. I still felt like no one, communicating my needs or relaying them, and that didn't mean that it was a bad experience. It just gave me more strength to make certain decisions, and then I felt empowered to take them. And as much as maybe at the end it wasn't what I originally thought is going to happen, I think it was still a positive experience, if that makes sense. So no one should be discouraged if it's not working out. It's just like an opportunity for adjustment. Yeah.
All right, any more questions? I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you to all of our panelists for the conversation. It's been, I think, really enlightening and a good conversation. I invite you guys to all stay, grab a drink, have some food, and chat some more.
Thank you.
Liz, do you guys want a picture?
Sure, yeah.
Or do you have like a, can you